Artie, did you ever have a babysitter? I mean, I didn't have a babysitter. Did you?
Can we just start the fucking video already?
Yeah, he's a little on edge right now because his New Year's resolution was to quit smoking.
And thank God for nicotine patches. Oh, yeah. That's that good stuff.
My Babysitter is a Vampire is what we're ranking today, and I have never heard of it. But of course, plenty of you guys have suggested this series, and so your wish is my command. Even though I know typically most people skip over this segment in the video, there's actually quite a bit of background information I have to talk about first. Hey, you said you wouldn't interrupt the video!
Fuck you!
Now I just feel like a babysitter. Well, this TV series was originally a TV movie that aired back in 2010, thanks to our friends from up north, Canada. I guess north is relative because I live in America.
Wow, real whiz kid when it comes to geography.
Anyways, the movie's a bit weird because by all means, for 90% of the show's run, you really don't have to watch this movie to watch this show, which is really how it should be. The show should work in a standalone setting. However, some of the bigger, more pivotal points within the show's story only make sense if you have watched the movie beforehand. This may seem like a moot point, but it's the principle of the thing. You don't gotta watch the Jimmy Neutron movie to watch the Jimmy Neutron show, then why should I here? Well, I did anyways, and it's okay. That's kinda how I describe this whole series, actually. Now, despite this being episodic in nature, there's still a main cast of characters I'd like to discuss proper before jumping into the ranking. Let's start with the characters. We got the core 5, and amongst this 5 is what I dubbed the main trio, that being Ethan, Benny, and Sarah. Ethan is the typical main protagonist. He's the straight man in any given scenario, the voice of reason, the heart of gold, and so on and so on. He also happens to have magical powers in which he can touch people or even objects and get visions on either what will happen in the future, what happened in the past, or just reveal their true identities in some fashion. These visions are pretty free form on what they decide to show. You know, it's just a means to keep the plot rolling along, even if it's a little contrived at times. There's a number of instances where he touches a clearly evil person to confirm that they are in fact evil, as if it wasn't already abundantly obvious. His best friend is Benny, and if you watched any live-action children's show out of the late 2000s and early 2010s, you know this best friend archetype all too well at this point. He's the somewhat eccentric, goofy foil character with a one-track mind. I wouldn't say he's dumb, that description goes to another character, but he doesn't care much about anything outside of just hanging out and having a good time. He, much like Ethan, also has magical abilities, as Benny is a spellcaster. The show's a bit wishy-washy on his actual capabilities. Either he is super competent at casting spells, or his spells completely backfire. I think it just depends on what the scene calls for. If they're trying to have a more comedic moment or even possibly raise some tension, the spell is going to backfire in some fashion. But if they just want to move the plot along, it's going to work like a charm. And that's totally fine. I just wish we got to see him get incrementally better at casting spells over the course of the entire series. I think it would just be a fun sense of progression to witness. And then we got Sarah, the babysitter vampire. Hence the name of the show. We actually got 3 vampire characters a part of this cast, all of which get turned into vampires in the movie. So it's not like some 700-year-old vampires hanging out in high school trying to hook up with high schoolers, cause that would be weird. Do I even bother making a Twilight joke in 2026? But Sarah is your typical female lead for these types of shows. She's almost an exact copy of Ethan, but with a bit more attitude. So it shouldn't be all too surprising when I say that these two have a romantic subplot that run throughout the entire series. But it's like a subplot of a subplot of a subplot. It barely gets any emphasis, or rather, any consistent emphasis. Ethan will make some remark alluding to his feelings towards Sarah, and then nothing until 10 episodes later where he has another throwaway line. It's also rather one-sided, but trust me, we'll talk about it later. But Sarah is an interesting character because for the first half of the series, she's considered a fledgling who is a vampire who has not drunk human blood and therefore has not unlocked her full vampiric powers. But you just kinda gotta take their word for it though, because she seemed pretty capable in her fledgling form and really not much stronger in her full vampire state. But she's also interesting because out of the 3 main vampires on the show, she's the only one that doesn't want to be a vampire and is constantly struggling with accepting her new life as a vampire. I'm bad at segues, so let's talk about Rory. Rory is, of course, a vampire, and he's one of my favorite characters on the show. He's a complete dumbass, purely used for comedic relief, and I love him for it. I was a bit worried early on because at the start he was purely used just for lighthearted comedic B plots, but he does get integrated into some episode main plots later on rather well. Unlike with Erica, where I feel like the show never knew how to properly utilize her. Of course, she's the last vampire to round out the main cast. She's not an antagonist, but she can act rather antagonistically towards the main cast when need be. I really hate to say it, but she kinda honestly is just there. Early on, she's either causing or heightening problems for the sake of the plots, and then in the middle of the show's run, she doesn't have much to do. And then in the final stretch, they start exclusively pairing her up with Sarah. I think in part to capture some of that chemistry that Ethan and Benny share, but to no prevail, to be honest. It sucks too, because they essentially had 3 perspectives they could have used to explore what it's like to be a vampire. You know, Sarah hates it and doesn't want to be a vampire. Rory is kind of neutral on the entire situation, and Erica loves it and indulges in it at any chance she gets. But they never explore Erica enough to gain any deeper insight as to why. Don't worry, we're almost there. There's a couple of reoccurring side characters here and there, like Ethan's parents or his sister, but they're not really worth discussing. Jane, the little sister, is almost worth bringing up. She has a couple of spotlight episodes, but just not enough. But Benny's grandma? Oh yeah, this is a character worth talking about. Benny's grandma, much like Benny, is also a spellcaster, but like actually competent through and through and just way too old to be dealing with any of this shit. She's cool, and I wish she was utilized a bit more, but her wherewithal and experience probably just made her too OP. It wouldn't be too much of a show if she was just involved with every single plot, but she is still very important to the series because she's in possession of a myriad of different magical objects. In fact, that's how a lot of these episodes kind of get rolling, with Benny either stealing something off her and then things go awry, or Benny trying to cast spells from her spellbook and then things still go awry. Not all the time, mind you, but a good chunk of episodes are like that. And then there's the Vampiric Council, a council of vampires that are there to uphold all the rules and regulations with being a vampire. So what are the rules and regulations, you may ask? I don't know. We never actually get some set in stone rules for how this society is run. Oftentimes they enter an episode because Sarah broke some rule that we didn't know about, or has to do some task to make up for something she did. It's a bit contrived at times. And for how overpowered these vampires are in the show, it would be great to have some restrictions to their powers, lest they get in trouble with the council. Like, the gang is in trouble. Luckily, the vampires can just fly everyone to safety. But it's against vampire rules to fly after midnight if you're under 200 years old, or, some shit like that. So now our vampire friends must break the rules or find some alternative way out of this predicament. I think that would make the show a lot more interesting if there were rules and regulations on what the vampires could do at any given moment. But that doesn't happen. It's a shame because, no pun intended, it would make for some nice steaks. And let me just say this because if I don't, I know someone in the comments will. This show was created by Fresh TV, the exact same people behind 16, Total Drama Island, and Stoked. So hey, there you go, a little flashbang of Gen Z nostalgia for you. I will say it's been a long while since I've watched any of those shows, so I don't know if those writing tropes carry over from those shows to this show.
Lazy piece of shit can't even watch an episode of 16 to check?
Dude, come on.
Fuck you!
There we go again. Anyways, before we jump into all of this, shout out to the channel members for directly supporting me. I very much appreciate it. If you want your name up here along with a bunch of other perks like getting early access to new videos, you can become a member today. Also, don't forget that we're only 17,000 subs away from me ranking Tales from the Crypt, so if you want to see that, make sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe.
You always did say it hurts to say those words. Anyways, sit back and relax as we rank every episode of My Babysitters, a Vampire from worst to best. Enjoy.
It's always hard talking about the worst episode in these types of videos because no matter what, I know this episode probably has its fans out there, ready to light my ass up in the comments for putting it at the very bottom. And then it just becomes a question of, how do I play this? Do I just go in and rip this one to shreds, or do I give it some leniency? Either way, there is no winning here. Say You'll Be Maztak is the worst episode in this series for the simple fact that nothing really happens. Or rather, the threat in this episode is established early on. Meanwhile, the characters in position to save the day do fuck all until the literal final seconds. I am not even remotely kidding. This Mayan queen comes back from the dead and brainwashes the entire male student body to do her bidding, which, in this scenario, is gathering up a bunch of miscellaneous things and performing a human sacrifice to bring back the sun god. By all means, a pretty cool concept. However, Erica and Sarah figure something is going on and then proceed to do absolutely nothing about it. I mean, no need to look into the strange and erratic behavior of your best friends. No need to question the identity of the new substitute teacher. I mean, we're talking about two people that can hypnotize people and make them do their own bidding. Shouldn't they have an inkling onto what's truly going on here? And sure, this is a somewhat petty complaint, but it also just really draws this episode out because between Erica and Sarah doing fuck all, the whole sun god stuff isn't terribly interesting either. Worst yet is that even once Erica and Sarah spring into action, they kind of just sit on the sidelines twiddling their thumbs, throwing out ideas on how they think they can help. Well, not actually helping. Like, I'm sorry. Do you guys not have vampire powers? You know, flight, super speed, super strength. Can you just run up and knock this bitch out cold? Why are we teaming up with the literal 8-year-old girl? I'm gonna approach this next part rather delicately because the last thing I want to do is come across as these right-wing, anti-woke grifters. But the antithesis of this episode boils down to emphasizing the power of women. Girl power, essentially, as it is all these women that save the day at the end. Kinda. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with this sort of message. Little girls should feel empowered watching this episode. But it is so clumsily done, so ham-fisted, so contrived. It starts to feel a little insulting and disingenuous. Not necessarily to me, but to its target audience. Like, yeah, girls did in fact get it done, but looking at the bigger picture, they didn't do much. And if we want to get real fucking pedantic about it, technically, Ethan was the one that killed the queen in the end. I mean, sure, through the aid of Erica and Sarah, but he is the one that delivers the final blow. And if they're gonna get on their soapbox and showcase how powerful women can be, then why would they make it that the man vanquishes the great evil within this storyline at the end? I mean, make Erica or Sarah do it. Hell, if you really want to drive home this message to kids, make Jane do it.
I always knew you were red-pilled.
I'm not. Like, even in the slightest. I just like an episode of a kid's show. I'm not going to base my entire political ideology around it. So yeah, just a rather boring episode where nothing really happens and its overall message feels condescending and disingenuous. Even if it clearly had good intentions, its execution was not all there. This is one of those episodes that are completely forgettable, mainly due to its lackluster plot, but also due to the fact that the more supernatural elements within the storyline are kinda superfluous. Like, it's about a ghost coach haunting Ethan until he wins a trophy for the school, but despite nobody else being able to see this character, it doesn't amount to much. He's hardly even a threat outside of kind of being a dick. His presence really isn't felt in this episode. I think he should have been a more persistent ghost. Even if he isn't physically threatening, because, he's a ghost, I think the constant annoyance would drive Ethan insane, and that would be a lot of fun to watch. Honestly, it feels like I'm watching just a run-of-the-mill tween live-action show, which kinda does describe what this show is, but the thing that makes this series so great is its supernatural elements, so what's the point here?
It's like if you made a video and I wasn't in it.
I think most people would actually be okay with that.
Bruh.
In the end, Ethan decides to wrestle this guy for the trophy, and first off, they are not even remotely in the same weight class. I don't know what teacher is allowing this to commence, but they should be fired. And second off, the kid he's wrestling is a kid from his own school, so why is he getting a trophy here? Also, on that note, why are you getting a trophy for a one and done match? Is there just no other competition here? This might seem like a more comedic complaint rather than a genuine one, but it's kind of a mix of the two. I think it's indicative of the larger problem here. Ethan spends the entire episode avoiding the ghost in any way possible, and it's only in the end where he decides to give in and wrestle this dude with no training whatsoever. He ends up beating him because he has a strategy, as if the guy who's an actual wrestler couldn't know how to counteract that. It feels rather contrived that he just wins this match at all. I think Ethan should have actually trained for this entire episode. Meanwhile, his friends are attempting to help him out with cheating via magic and whatnot. And they kind of do that in this episode itself, but it's a very minor plot point in the grand scheme of things. And I think it should have had greater emphasis. That way this story could have been about hard work versus magic, and how sometimes working hard towards a goal is more rewarding than achieving said goal instantly with no effort. But that's not really what's going on here. What we're left with is just forgettable. This episode is about a ghost that died on stage many years ago, and now in the present, the said ghost is sabotaging the current play's production from actually becoming a show. If that at all sounds familiar to you, that's because it is. And I've talked about this kind of episode many times already on my channel. Goosebumps had an episode exactly like this. Same goes for Art for the Dark, and even Bone Chillers. Kinda. The point is, I've seen this song and dance plenty of times already, but does this show at least have a unique interpretation of this storyline? No, not really. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's totally fine at the end of the day, but this is my own subjective ranking, and I just never really cared for these types of episodes to begin with. And after seeing so many of them at this point, it really just needed some secret sauce to stand out. I will give some credit. I think the ending with all the chaos going on is a fun and much earned sequence for all the build-up, but everything beforehand I have already seen but done better. Also, Benny and Ethan just decided to join the drama club and they are immediately given big time roles within the current production. Ethan just becomes the stage manager. No, that's not how that works. Look, I've never been in drama club myself, but I had plenty of friends that were. And you may not think the stage manager is a flashy position to have, but trust me, once a senior graduated, it was a fucking bloodbath fighting over that position. Does this matter at all? No, of course not. Is this episode bad? Well, it's not good. once again covering something that pops up a lot on this channel, that being sirens. I mean, Creeped Out, Creepshow, and VHS all had episodes, or segments, centered around sirens. And more often than not, those ranked rather low on my lists, so I guess My Babysitter's a Vampire is no different. But there's a new girl in school who has the ability to throw people into fits of rage just by singing. And it takes an embarrassingly long time for the gang to piece together this little 4-piece puzzle. I mean, hell. Even after Ethan touches her and gets a vision into her true character, he's all like, something's not right about her. Like, come on, man. Rory not being able to put 2 and 2 together makes sense. He's the dumb one. But you're supposed to be smart. But at least this episode revolves around a talent show. So we get some fine side excursions of characters preparing for it, including one of the most embarrassingly cringy scenes in the entire show, which isn't really a detractor or a complaint. If anything, it perfectly captures the true essence of high school talent shows, which is unbridled cringe. So I guess the main plot here is very, whatever. You know, nothing to write home about. But all the subplots are just lighthearted and fun. You know, it's kind of like going to a restaurant and hating your entree. But damn, that appetizer was pretty solid though.
Damn, are you throwing shade at Chili's now?
Ironically, I think that's just what most American chain restaurants are like nowadays. You know, bad entrees, but really good apps. I think this villain could have worked if she was just like, not so obviously the bad guy and causing chaos everywhere. It would have been a cool mystery if fights just start randomly breaking out throughout the entire school and the gang tries to figure out why that is. Eventually coming to the realization that at every fight, this girl was there singing, ultimately deducing that she must be a siren. But I mean, hey, I'm just spitballing here, but I think that would have been a better approach. I love when shows, or more specifically, children's shows, take some urban legend we probably all heard of growing up and actually realize it into a fully fleshed out story. In this episode's case, it takes the classic myth of alligators living in sewers and makes it a reality. Pretty cool, right? Which is why it's such a travesty that this episode just ends up being so lackluster. I think it starts out strong, having people go missing whenever they're near bodies of water, but then it quickly fizzles out. They don't spend enough time stewing in this mystery. They jump the gun too quickly and reveal that, yeah, Rory ended up flushing some baby alligators and some magical stuff down the toilet. And so therefore, we're not just dealing with alligators, but magical alligators, which is a bit of a stretch. Outside of their glowing mouths, I don't exactly know what makes them magical. They just act like regular old alligators, which are still dangerous by all means, but at that point, just call animal control. Also, once they kill all the alligators, it's never shown or even stated if the people early on in the episode that disappeared are okay. So we can only assume that these kids at the start just straight up died and nobody cares. I mean, I guess I don't either, but it's weird that there's no closure, right? Also, to add insult to injury, Sarah is just farting throughout the entire episode. That is literally her entire subplot. She ate too much and is now just extremely gassy, farting the entire fucking episode. It's lowbrow and annoying, and yeah, I understand that this is a kid's show, but this show really doesn't stoop down to this level of humor, or at least so aggressively as they do here. And on that note, I'm not getting invested in Sarah's flatulence problem. I doubt anyone is. So why even include it? There was a glimmer of hope in this episode, but it quickly lost its luster. You know, I love a goofy, fun time. You give me a haunted car episode, I'm there. Now, you give me an episode about a fucking vampire car, I am totally there, dude. which is why it is immensely disappointing that this episode ranks so low on my list. I mean, let's talk about all the positives. All the vampire car shit is fantastic. It is equally fun and cartoony at the exact same time. I mean, at the end, where they had to drive a stake through the cart's heart to kill it, you can't ask for a better time. But everything else, who gives a shit? It's just about our cast of characters trying to figure out why the car's a vampire in the first place, which you could argue as being interesting, but if I'm being honest, it's such a silly plot, just let it be silly. I don't need all this background information and explanations as to why and how. I mean, it could have worked if it was actually interesting, or as equally silly as the premise. If a vampire bit a car and that's why the car is now a vampire, I am totally on board. But it's not that, and it is what it is. It works best when it sticks to purely being about the car, but when it attempts to peel back the layers, I think it totally loses its charm, and it starts to demystify everything that was set up. And slowly, this episode just starts to collapse. This might be shocking, because from what I gathered, this is a rather well-liked episode within this series, and I'll give it that. I can see why it is so well-liked. I mean, creepy little girls are always going to strike fear into most anyone's heart. A real tried and true horror tradition at this point. But I think the problem with a lot of lower-ranking episodes is that they'll have a genuinely great concept, even a great first act, but it's almost kind of like they didn't know where to go after that. Any semblance of intrigue or suspense just dissipates completely. I mean, we start with a bunch of brainwashed Girl Scouts selling donuts that also brainwash whoever eats them. Already an amazing threat, not necessarily the kids. I mean, even possessed kids could get knocked out rather easily. I mean, they're fucking kids. But the donuts that brainwashes people, that's the real threat. I mean, who the hell is gonna turn down a donut?
Yeah, I'll take a cigarette.
I said donut.
Fuck. I thought I could pull a fast one on you.
And then the creepiness and mystery is turned up even more once all the kids start obsessively drawing this one image of a red door over and over again. But also, there's some closer personal stakes in the story as Ethan's sister, Jane, becomes possessed herself. And with all of that, I am completely hooked. I'm in. I can't wait to see where this goes. Well, it didn't rank this low for no reason. Turns out this episode is more interested in explaining things than actually doing anything proactive within the story. Like, sure, it is actually really interesting learning about the true plot behind the episode. Turns out there's some ancient mole god that lives in the underworld, and they've been luring children to their lair, so to say, for years. That's totally fine, and actually pretty interesting, but so much of this plot is spent digging this information up, that by the time we get an actual answer, I just don't care anymore. I was much more invested in the widespread epidemic of this kind of event. I mean, they were brainwashing all of these adults left and right because, once again, who would pass up on donuts? But that actually brings up another problem. What happened to all these adults? Seemingly they all got, but we never see them in the final act. Realistically, they probably just brainwashed them to get out of town so there'd be no struggle abducting all these children. Which could have worked if we actually got a proper sense of scale from all these absences. Like, just a quick little scene with Ethan and Benny running around an eerily empty town with no adult in sight would have sold this idea significantly better than what we end up with, which isn't much. Speaking of isn't much, the actual villain of this story, sent out to do the mole god's bidding, she is a non-threat. She has her little mole staff that rather slowly shoots out magic or whatever, but ultimately is defeated by Ethan, the only character out of the 5 main characters with no super or magical capabilities to help out in physical altercations whatsoever. It's strange too, because they give the other characters arbitrary reasons why they can't fight the chick directly, and why it's ultimately left up to Ethan to do so. But wouldn't it be easier just to have all these other characters fall victim to the hypnosis by unknowingly eating the donuts? That would actually raise the stakes significantly and make this way more eventful, but I don't know. I think I'm talking about this one a bit too much at this point. So, very strong start, but much like the rest down here at the bottom, there's not much beyond that. This is the first official push within the series to set up the whole Ethan x Sarah relationship subplot, which not only kind of goes nowhere in this episode, but also kind of goes nowhere in the entire series. I will talk about that later. But this is actually a kind of classic love potion gone wrong sort of story, because of course it is. Has there even been a story about a love potion gone right? But both Ethan and Benny accidentally get the entire female student body to fall in love with them, including the adult teachers.
Where's this going?
In this scenario, thankfully, nowhere. Because as Benny's grandma explains, the problem with love potions is that they make people fall in love, and then it turns into hate. So we go from this entire school tripping head over heels for Ethan and Benny to wanting to tear them apart limb from limb, including Sarah and Erica. You know, the two people that could literally tear them apart from limb if they wanted to. This isn't a bad episode by any means. It's fun to see the rise and fall of everything. It's just that, you know, it's a love potion story. Kind of a dime a dozen in children's media, to be honest. I will say, most of the time in these types of episodes, the love they get from others becomes overbearing, and that is the downfall. But here, nah. They just flip a switch from love to outright hate. So it slightly alters this kind of storyline, but it's still just the same old at the end of the day. Double Negative is a fun, wacky episode that definitely leans more into the cartoony side of things than it does scary, which is totally fine. My Babysitters, a Vampire isn't strictly a horror show. In fact, I'd say it's more of a standard tween sitcom with horror elements more than anything else, which may point to my slight disdain for this particular episode. Point blank, I'm a 25-year-old man, soon to be 26.
Oh man, that means you're not gonna have health insurance soon.
Yeah, which reminds me, we need to stop using the microwave with the door open once I no longer have health insurance.
But that's no fun!
Anyways, this episode is about a camera that produces an evil negative clone of whoever gets their picture taken by said camera. Really, what this all boils down to is just an evil Benny running amok around town. He doesn't really have any dastardly plan or anything like that. He's just going around being a jerk to people, and that's kind of it. It's a fun episode, if not a little lackluster as far as an overall story is concerned. But like I said at the start, it's more playing towards its tween sitcom roots than it is to the horror side, which is fine if you're into that. It's just not for me. This is a completely average episode that tells a completely average werewolf story. This new kid at school is very clearly a werewolf, and very clearly an adult. Check this guy's birth certificate. I mean, he only looks slightly younger than Ethan's dad. People treat him like he's just a hairy teen, but come on, the dude's got a mortgage. The age discrepancy may be funny, but it turns somewhat uncomfortable funny when Erica's whole subplot throughout this entire episode is just trying to get with this dude. I mean, she may be a vampire, but she's still a teenager. I mean, both actors are adults who are playing teens, so who gives a shit? The dude that plays this character is just very obviously an adult. That's all I really wanted to get across. But he's not the actual threat within the episode. Ethan is, because after getting scratched by him, he starts slowly morphing into a werewolf. and it's ultimately up to the gang to rescue him from his fate. Once again, just very standard werewolf shenanigans. It's nothing new, and ultimately, it's just fine. I will give props to the ending though, where it's revealed that this guy actually isn't a werewolf, but more of a were-dog. It's a nice, fun little subversion, but does kind of call into question how or why Ethan turns into a full-blown werewolf. Shouldn't he also be a were-dog? I mean, he got scratched by a were-dog after all. It doesn't matter too much in the long run. More of a nitpick than an actual complaint. It didn't detract from my overall experience, which really was just a resounding okay time. This episode sees Ethan and Benny being undercover and dressing up as cheerleaders because they suspect that the head cheerleader is an evil witch brainwashing the fellow cheerleaders into enacting some evil plot. I just wonder what dumb backlash this episode would have gotten if it was made in the modern day and age. But that's about all there is to this episode. I think the final action set piece is great, easily one of the most visually impressive segments in the entire series. But outside of that, I don't know what to say. We're officially hitting our average episode strive here, so I don't have too many heavy complaints or heavy compliments. It's a good precedent for how this show tends to operate. If you want to know if this series is for you or not, check this one out. It's essentially the benchmark to judge the rest of the series through. This one kind of starts out as your run-of-the-mill mummy episode, with the gang accidentally bringing a mummy back to life, but it actually ends up on a rather introspective note exploring existential themes of death and love. This is still My Babysitters, a Vampire at the end of the day. You know, the same series where Sarah had a whole subplot about damn near shitting herself for an entire episode. So what is explored and discussed at the end here isn't particularly deep or profound, but it doesn't need to be. I respect the show for even trying to gauge the audience in such subject matters anyhow. And besides, they are still able to close this episode out on a rather fun action set piece so the 10-year-old boys watching this won't get bored. And I guess the 25-year-old men as well. But I think more than anything else, it does a really good job illustrating Sarah's main plight, as the mummy in question wants to be with Sarah forever, and he wants to live in the underworld together. Sarah, of course, can't get down with this, but at the same time, it ever so slightly highlights her struggles with being a vampire, grappling with the idea of immortality and living for an eternity. So while she rejects his offer of living forever in the afterlife, she is still cursed to live forever in the real life. It was a pleasant surprise this rather schlocky love story actually had a somewhat profound character moment at the end. I genuinely wasn't expecting that. So it may just be an okay episode, but at least it ended on a good note. Yes. It's always fun to see where the first episode ranks on these types of lists. And I guess in this case, right in the middle, more or less. Lawn of the Dead is probably one of the most solid first episodes to a series. It does a good job organically introducing the characters and this world to an audience that may not know what's going on. Then again, I guess the movie really is technically the first introduction to these characters anyhow. But I like to give this episode some brownie points because I think it still manages to work rather well even for people who didn't watch the movie. I think it does a good job introducing the main trio to the audience, but not so much Erica or Rory. They aren't the most gracefully introduced, and probably confuse some people jumping into the series blind without prior knowledge of the movie. But hey, as far as the episode goes, their presence is rather minimal. Same kind of goes with the plot of this one. It's just a nice low stakes plot seeing Benny trying to resurrect this girl's dead dog because Benny wants to get with her. I think if someone brought one of my dead pets back from the dead, I would be more horrified than turn on, but this is Benny we're talking about here. The dude doesn't really think out most of his plans. Case in point, when he accidentally resurrects all of the dead animals within the area. And they're all evil, by the way. Meaning, they gotta kill this dead dog again. Strangely enough, there is a part of this episode I do think is sorely missing from the rest of the series, and that is a balance between the more fantastical side of things and the more mundane, down-to-earth family side of things. Because these guys are trying to kill these zombie animals in the kitchen, all while Ethan's dad is trying to have a very important business dinner in the dining room. I've always loved the dynamic of characters trying to save face with their parents. You know, try not to let them on with their more magical escapades. And the show does do this from time to time throughout the series, but not to the extent that is done here. I don't know. I just wish there's more emphasis on this dichotomy throughout the entire series. But, yeah. Solid episode, but a good first episode. Finally, an episode that leans into horror. Don't get me wrong, there's still all those wacky tween sitcom antics to be found in this episode. I mean, that's a part of the show's DNA after all. But there is such a deliberate vision here being realized to deliver on the scares. Some of the CGI holds it back at times, but the more practical elements elevates it back up. On the surface, it may seem like another standard technology bad sort of episode, but if you dig just a little bit deeper, you'll see that it is just that. Yeah, a tree gets chopped down and starts taking over the school's technology, and even Rory at a certain point. But a simple and basic plot does not detract from this episode's amazing visuals. Slowly seeing the school get entangled with vines, coupled with the long dark corridors our characters have to fight through, make the whole experience rather claustrophobic and eerie. You also have some slight body horror here and there, proving that no matter the budget, plant life fusing with human bodies will always make for some great visuals. I think the big standout problem with this episode is that it takes a while to go anywhere. It's a real slow roller over here. It's a bit too busy highlighting Rory and Erica's shared admiration for some band, and also making a Rickroll joke in 2011. I feel like 2011 isn't horribly dated to be making such jokes, but it still definitely missed the mark there by a little bit. And would you believe that this isn't just a one-off joke, but the actual solution on how to beat the plant virus infecting all of the school's technology? It's essentially Chekhov's Rickroll, I guess. It's a good time when it finally gets into the thick of it, but it's just too bad that it drags getting to that point. This one's gonna be a little hard to talk about. It's the first episode of season 2 and directly deals with the fallout of the season 1 finale. And considering that I haven't talked about that specific episode yet, it leaves my hands a little tied on what I can properly communicate without hijacking what I want to say down the line. I guess the only key point you need to understand about the prior episode is that Sarah is now a full vampire, and thus has to answer directly to the vampire council, which she wants nothing to do with, leading to some good old-fashioned infighting amongst vampiric society. Sarah doesn't give a shit, but goons from the council start targeting Ethan as a way to stronghold Sarah into cooperating. Also, they mark Ethan as a vampire killer because of the prior episode. Once again, we will talk about it later. Realistically speaking, this episode is kind of just a bunch of vampire melodrama, but I was kind of into it. Mainly because I just found the vampire console to be such a cool concept that is ultimately underutilized and kinda underdeveloped. But this is one of the only few episodes where they are on full display. Now, I will admit, I don't think this episode works on its own. It works more so contextually as a part of the larger picture within the series. So, even though I think it's a pretty good episode, all things considered, I can't recommend it. Because to feel its full weight, you really need to watch it within the context of the entire series. Or, at the very least, within the context of the movie and the season 1 finale. Overall, it's pretty good, but you just need to do some homework to fully appreciate it. Cute title to an episode, but no, sadly, this isn't a musical spoof. My closeted musical loving ass was only slightly disappointed by that revelation. Instead, this is just a story about a doll that comes to life and turns other people into dolls in order to stay alive. I mean, it's a children's horror show after all. A series like this isn't complete without a scary doll episode. But outside of that, I don't have much else to say about this one. I mean, it's pretty standard shenanigans for the show and this kind of genre of storyline, so to say. The only critical complaint I have about this specifically is that some of the makeup is a bit dodgy. I mean, these skin flaps aren't even properly color matched to her foundation and just look a little janky. But that's really the only complaint I have. Everything else is rather solid, and any other complaint is kind of excusable. Tell you what, go ahead and watch King Newsme's video on this very episode. He does a much better job going over everything than I'm willing to. Plus, you know, the guy's a cool dude, so I might as well throw him a bone.
Throw him a bone? Isn't he a significantly bigger channel than you?
I wouldn't say significantly.
He literally has more than double your subscriber count.
I think Blood Drive is more or less what I expected this series to be about. Meaning, it's a lot of vampire on vampire action with a very vampire-centric plot. Now, I'm glad this show has much more range than just resorting to vampire-esque storylines, but at the same time, an episode like this is a nice little treat. And one of the rare times where I think every character is utilized rather effectively within the plot. I mean, even Erica, who is usually just kinda there, is somewhat relevant to the story here. She, along with Rory, aren't the most prominent characters within this scenario. In fact, they kinda get kicked to the curb with this episode's B-plot. But it's a fun time and does manage to link back up with the A-plot at the end, along with giving the A-plot a little bit more urgency within regards to the scale and sense of peril, which, might I add, is kind of rare for the show. Usually the A-plots and B-plots stay separated. More often than not. And it's a simple plot about two vampires infiltrating a school and running a blood drive because, you know, they're vampires. It's the big revelation for this episode, and even though it's painstakingly obvious, it still mainly works because it was never really built up to be this big twist in the first place. I will say though, they foil these vampires' plans by trading this entire van full of blood for just one bag of Ethan's blood. Because Ethan has special blood. You know, I guess he's got that 99.1% Walter White blue sky shit. It's a bit of a letdown though, at least in retrospect. Because I felt like this reveal was going to be an important plot point down the line. Like, Ethan's got special blood that is extremely desired by vampires. So maybe later on, a bunch of vampires will gang up and suck Ethan dry once the word gets out amongst the vampire ranks. But outside of this episode, Ethan's special blood is never brought up again. Nothing ever comes of this. Now, it doesn't detract from this episode in the slightest, but it does kind of detract from the series at large. Maybe it's just something these writers forgot about, or maybe there was something planned for season 3, which never came out. Who knows? Overall, this episode is simple and good. I hate to keep doing this, but we got a zombie episode where it plays out like a standard run-of-the-mill zombie story. I by no means say this in a disparaging way, despite my tone. I'm just pointing out that this show likes to do episodes on classic horror storylines and kind of just does them in the most standard way possible, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is a sitcom at the end of the day. Sitcom literally means situational comedy, and the situation at hand here is a zombie outbreak. This kind of genre of television thrives on how characters react or don't react to what's going on around them. So these kinds of settings may be nothing new, and they may not subvert the narrative in a unique way, but I do also recognize that they don't have to do that. This was a very long and roundabout way of saying the plots are standard and it's fine. And technically, their version of a zombie outbreak starts because of some tainted coffee. So I can at least say that their cause as to why this is happening is original, as far as I know. I might just get a comment saying how some other piece of media did the exact same thing. There's no winning sometimes. I'm just trying to give some credit where it's due. But yeah, it's a zombie episode and it's got all the classic tropes. Like Benny getting bit by a zombie and then hiding it from the group because of course he would. He would totally be that guy. But, as I not so eloquently rambled on about, this episode works so well because we get to see how each individual character reacts to the situation at hand. I love Rory in this episode specifically because he actually learns of the zombie outbreak early on when it originates in the teacher's lounge, but doesn't do anything because he's a student and he's not allowed into the teacher's lounge. Grade A sense of logic there. But every character gets their time to shine in this episode. Except for Erica. It's always Erica. They just don't know what to do with her. But with how airtight this episode is paced and structured, I don't know how they could have really fit her into this one. So it's probably for the better that she's just completely excluded from this episode. Also, these zombies go back to normal once they turn the school's air conditioning on, which is very similar to what happens in Community's zombie episode. I was already getting some massive parallels to that show's Zombies episode. But with this specific ending, it had me wondering if all this was just one big coincidence, or if it was all just one big homage. I mean, either way, it's a great time. My Babysitters, a Vampire being a Canadian show all but means that a hockey-centric episode was more than guaranteed at some point. And, well, here we are. I mean, if there's three things Canada is known for, it's poutine, Tim Hortons, and hockey. To my Canadian viewers, let me know if I'm wrong. But this episode sees Ethan and Benny join the school's hockey team, or more so, making the cut kind of by default. Just a right place, right time sort of situation because, let's face it, these guys aren't very good. However, Ethan's hockey IQ is actually really good, which pretty quickly makes him the prime candidate for a brain transplant, because this team boasts a very physically dominant player with no brain. I'm sure you could guess given the episode's title, but this guy is a bunch of dead bodies stitched together for the sole purpose to dominate in this sport. Which, I know hockey is big in Canada, but it's fucking high school hockey. It ain't that serious. Save that amount of effort for the big leagues. But this plot also directly ties into Sarah's side plot as the vampiric consul accuses her of grave robbing. So it's not just about Ethan and Benny having to overcome this monster and mad scientist, but also it's a race against the clock to prove Sarah's innocence in time, which is nice. It gives this episode a ticking clock element while also having some grander emotional stakes. And also, it's Frankenstein but with hockey. It's just a fun time through and through. The final set piece is great, as our vampire characters have a hard time using their powers, such as super speed, because the ice is slippery and they just lose any sense of precision, essentially nullifying their powers and having to come up with a different solution to take this monster down. It's not much and it's really simple, but I found it rather clever and endearing. Never Meet Your Heroes is a type of episode I always loved growing up, and still do. The boys are obsessed with this guy named Doug, who's a paranormal investigator and is clearly a complete hack. It's a little strange these guys like a show like this, considering that they deal with this kind of stuff on a day-to-day basis, but for the sake of the plot, who gives a shit? Because the boys find themselves in a bit of a pickle once Doug actually pays them a visit for his show. They find out that the show is actually on the verge of cancellation and he needs a hit episode, or else it's curtains for him. Doug really is just ready to call it quits, but an opportunity is thrown his way when his vampire detecting technology reveals Sarah to be a vampire. So he decides to hunt her for his show. Now, this is great because, yeah, Doug is a hack and a bit of a goof, but at the same time, he is kind of an actual threat. Maybe not physically per se. Sarah could easily outmaneuver him and just kind of kill him if she wanted to. But it's more of a threat to outing her as a vampire, and more so, the existence of vampires to the world. I mean, realistically, nobody would believe that shit though. Like, if Ghost Adventures caught an actual real ghost on camera, the public would still denounce it as real. But for the sake of this episode, and more so this series, it is treated as a real threat. But the main dilemma that I love so much about this episode comes down to Ethan and Benny. Like, they love this guy Doug and his show, and they really don't want this show to get canceled, and they realize that this story would actually be a big break for him and save him from cancellation. But at the same time, they have to protect Sarah and her secret. The public can't know that vampires are real. Ultimately, they're in a very sticky situation, so they decide to put on a show that could be perceived as real, but also very clearly fake. That way Doug can keep his show, but the great vampire secret is safe. Of course, this all just blows up in their face, and the whole facade just falls apart. Sarah's secret is safe, but Doug loses his show, which he then transitions into running a prank show, and all the boys are just also super into it. A bit strange that these kids would still care about this guy, because the episode really highlighted how much of a loser this guy really is, but much like pigs to slop, they're not going to complain. I love this episode for being on the goofier comedic side of things, but for also still having some rather serious stakes. Okay, this is the last episode in the entire series. It's also the show's first and only two-parter, and it's quite infamous amongst the My Babysitters of Vampire community, because it is a very good episode, but its quality is oftentimes overshadowed by the ending, or, lack thereof. The fans know where I'm going with this, but let me paint the picture for those who haven't watched the show, which, if that's you, thanks for watching the video anyways. It's really cool. So this being the finale of season 2, and in retrospect, the entire show, they pull out all the stops. Like, the opening song in these two episodes is actually sung by the actresses for Sarah and Erica, which I thought was really cute as a sort of send-off. But the core of this episode is Ethan finally trying to confess his feelings to Sarah, and they wind up on a date together. Now, the Ethan and Sarah stuff is really poorly built up throughout the entire series. Literally every 5 episodes, this subplot would be brought up in some sort of throwaway line. It's really easy to forget that this is even a running through line in this show. It also seems rather one-sided. It's mainly just Ethan crushing on Sarah. And to be fair, Sarah's kind of going through a lot. She's got a lot on her plate with being a vampire and whatnot, but still. Anyways, I'm willing to give this episode a pass because not only is it the final episode, but they do actually properly explore the romantic interest in one another. Finally. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that this episode explores these two being a romantic couple very well, but overall the series does not. But much like the entirety of this show, this also goes nowhere even in this final episode because their dinner is interrupted by the main threat of this episode. The vice principal.
Fucking who?
Oh, yeah, that's on me. I didn't properly set him up. So, at the start of season 2, we get a new character who is the vice principal. He's kinda just there. He's in a handful of episodes, but never is really integrated into any of their plots, which actually makes him being the big twist villain for the season genuinely surprising. But in the final episode, he's actually revealed to be a dark wizard with a serious vendetta against vampires due to some family history. So he steals this orb that's able to drain vampires of all their dark energy, which, no surprise, kills them. He is such a threat with his orb that the vampiric council is just like, hey man, GG's, let's book it out of here and relocate. But our main trio won't go out like that, and actually devise a plan to stop him, even teaming up with fucking Jesse to do so.
Once again, fucking who?
Yeah, I also didn't set him up. Jesse is actually the main villain vampire from the My Babysitters, a Vampire movie, so our characters teaming up with him is a big deal. Also, technically, this isn't Jesse's first appearance in the show. He was also in the season 1 finale, but we'll talk more about that one later. Anyways, so all of this is good. There's a serious threat that's got the fucking vampiric council running for the hills. But also, the emotional stakes are at an all-time high because it really seems like Ethan and Sarah are finally gonna become a couple. I mean, there was a misunderstanding during their date, and before they could work out all their woes, they were interrupted by all of this shit. So basically, the stakes are high and love is on the table. So what happens? Well, Ethan eventually goats the vice principal into absorbing all the dark energy from the orb to become super powerful. Of course, this backfires and the dude explodes, and then the episode just fucking ends? There's no actual resolution here. Hell, technically, we don't even know if our main characters survive. They sense he's gonna explode, so they start booking it, but we never actually see them get to safety. And on that note, look at the explosion. I don't think they survived. But also, what happened to the romance? We don't get any closure to that series-long subplot. I thought they would defeat the big bad and then finally talk about their feelings, but no. This ends so abruptly, we never got a proper conclusion to the thing that was built up, albeit very poorly, throughout the entire show. Furthermore, Rory and Erica just aren't a part of the climax for this episode. They're chilling with the vampiric council and watch the explosion from afar, and they barely have a reaction to it at all. Why weren't these guys helping out? Yeah, maybe it's a bit indicative of their characterization just to run away, but for a big series finale, they should have been there. Now, they tried to get a third season or even a TV movie to officially wrap up the series, but for one reason or another, to no avail. I get they were trying to end on a cliffhanger to spark interest in continuing this project, but at the same time, it cannot be understated how jarring and abruptly this episode just ends. And they had plenty of time to wrap this up properly. It's a two-parter. So after all that ranting and bitching and moaning, why is this episode so high up on the list? Well, it's a damn good episode. Everything about this works so damn well. It's just that the ending is horseshit. Or rather, the ending is technically good. It's a grand epic and very climactic. It's just that there's no actual resolution here, both in terms of emotions or in terms of story. The big bad explodes and it really seems like everyone dies except for Rory and Erica. What the fuck? It's like if you ate a truly amazing dinner at one of your favorite restaurants, and instead of polishing off a great meal with a nice little dessert, the waiter comes over and smacks you in the fucking face. The actual meal is great, but I'm gonna walk away from that restaurant remembering that experience more than the actual superb dinner. And so I tried to factor that into the ranking. It's a great episode, but it really does just smack you in the face. I like this episode so much because it really is just a complete ensemble cast. Kinda. Engaged within one storyline. No side stories here, just one big cast bouncing off each other, sharing some great chemistry. All while trying to get a demon out of Sarah after the boys fucked around and found out with a Ouija board. Now, when I said it was kind of the complete ensemble cast, I was referring to the fact that Erica just isn't in this episode. I mean, they got fucking Jane, and she works great in the story, but still not Erica. I think this to me really just demonstrates how non-essential this character is, or rather, how it seems like the writers just didn't know how to implement her. I like the character, by the way. I just don't think she was properly utilized. But yeah, this episode is just a fun time watching all these different characters interact with each other as they try to expunge this demon. The only other thing worth pointing out is that at the end of this episode, they indirectly and accidentally revive Jesse, which just so happens to lead into the next ranking spots. Now, this is a much better way to do a season finale. Not only does it have a great threat, emotional stakes, and moments that carry heavy consequences, but it also knows how to fucking conclude everything properly. You telling me we got some actual resolutions here? I think the only thing that you can ding this episode for is that it would be really confusing for people who haven't watched the movie beforehand. Which, I know, but once again, I think it truly is the show's responsibility to get viewers who haven't seen the movie up to speed on what's going on. And they kinda do. They very briefly talk about Jesse to clue people in who didn't watch the movie. But I feel like they don't do the best of really showcasing the gravity of the situation at hand. Anyways, this season finale literally has everything that made the season 2 finale so great, but it's on a smaller scale, and the threat is a lot more personal to our main characters, which you really feel in the climax. Of course, this is also the episode where Sarah goes full vampire in order to save Ethan's life, which directly sets up her integration into the vampire council in the next season. Same goes for Ethan, as he kills a vampire in this episode, which directly sets up his main conflict in the next episode. I think this episode works so well because you see the immediate cause and effect of all these characters in the very next season. Things don't change drastically in the grand scheme of things. There's still a status quo the show has to keep. Sarah being full vampire doesn't really mean much other than the console having more storylines in the next season. But it's a significant enough of a change to feel different yet keep the status quo of the show. This episode just meant something. It really showed me that this series maybe kind of would have worked better if it was more serialized and less monster of the week, but who knows. All I know is that this episode is great. This is actually one of the very few times where this series actually gets a little introspective with its characters, and actually gives them a proper space to explore their internal struggles. As the plot sees Benny messing up some spell which sends each character from the main trio into their own individual pocket dimension, in which they are completely isolated and left to confront their worst fear. Benny's is a bit of a joke, admittedly. His biggest fear is a cyber dentist. I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity to explore this character on a deeper level instead of just having a jokey sort of fear, but at the same time, I think this episode did need this as a break from the more serious or heavy fears that Sarah and Ethan end up facing.
I think I'm deeply unhappy with my life.
Hey man, stick to the fucking jokes. Sarah's biggest fear is herself, or at least what she could become if she falls victim to her vampire desires. This has always been the big struggle of Sarah, but never really given the most emphasis throughout the show. So it's great to see that this show finally sunk its teeth into the issue and tackle it head on. And then Ethan's biggest fear is just a wizard in a black robe. Seems like a weird fear to have, and that's because it's not his biggest fear. As Benny's grandma explains at the end of the episode, Ethan's biggest fear is being alone. He was just supposed to be in this world completely alone. So this mysterious man in a black cloak just infiltrated his dimension and actually tried to kill him for real. It's a great mysterious note to end the episode on, and of course, watching this video kind of takes away from the mystery because, yeah, it's the vice principal. But at the same time, it was genuinely kind of eerie that we now have some new mysterious bad guy hunting down the main characters. I wish that was a more prevalent storyline throughout the season, but that's not this episode's fault. It's a great standalone episode, but an excellent lead up to the final episode in this series. Yeah, okay. You guys know I'm a sucker for Halloween-centric episodes. Call me dumb and impressionable, and hey, you're not wrong.
They're not wrong.
That's what I just said. This episode sees Rory coming into possession with his ancient mask that not only takes over Rory's body, but then also possesses the ability to turn people into their Halloween costumes. So people dressed up as witches are now just real witches, and I mean, you get the point. And this is where I wish I could go more into depth, but truth be told, that's the entire episode. Pretty much everyone gets turned into their Halloween costumes, and it's a big old-fashioned clusterfuck. And there's a lot of variety in terms of scares and humor. I think in large part just due to the sheer scope and variety of different costumes displayed throughout the entire episode. And in that regard, they perfectly utilize every single character to their fullest potential. And yes, even Erica. This episode feels so much like a celebration of what this show means at large. Even if there's no big story or character things within this episode, this still feels like almost a finale of some sorts. It is just such a fun time, and that's really all my praise boils down to. It's a fun time. It's a really fucking fun time. It's not breaking any new grounds, but it doesn't have to. It excels so much at what it does, and that's why it's my #1 episode. So that was My Babysitters a Vampire, and it was fine. You know, it's a horror tween sitcom that is more tween sitcom than horror, which is fine, but just not for me. At least in my current day and age. I think I would have absolutely loved this as a kid though.
You know, this whole quitting cigarettes thing is a lot easier than people make it out to be.
I mean, sure, but we need to get you off of nicotine now.
Oh, wow. You just hate seeing me achieve my goals.